Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to paint this layered reef scene. I thought about layered mountain scenes that you see a lot of painted in watercolors, so I thought why not create the same concept but underwater, and it ended up being so much fun. For this I'm going to paint freehand, but I'm going to mask off the sides so I don't have to worry about the edges when I paint. And also because it's a spread, it really helps to clip your paper while masking. As for the colors, I'm going to use Indigo by Schmincke, Ultramarine Finest by Schmincke, Azure Blue by White Knights, Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, and Cobalt Green by Holbein. I'm also going to use a white pen. This is unbranded, but you can use any brands you have, or you can even paint the white with bleed-proof white or even white gouache. Let's begin to paint. I'm going to start by dampening the top part of the spread, and I'm going to do this fairly evenly so I can create a soft background. I've switched to a soft round brush and I'm going to place a light consistency of Hansa Yellow Medium, and I'm also going to spread some Cobalt Green in random places. If the color mixed slightly, it's okay. I just want to create a randomized blurry background for now. I feel like everything looks a bit too light with the yellow, so I'm going to add more Cobalt Green, especially around the bottom. Once I reach around 1/3 down, I'm going to dry everything off. I'm just going to use a hairdryer because I want this to be completely dry before starting to paint the layers. I'm going to paint from the back to the front, so I'm going to use this light blue mixture from Cobalt Green and Azure Blue. And since these are going to be reefs, I imagine that the silhouette of the surface would be uneven and slightly jagged. I'm also going to play with a bit of the height. Once I'm pretty happy with the silhouette, I'm going to pull the paint downwards using a clean damp brush, but if you feel like you don't have enough pigments, you can always pick up more. I want the bottom to be lighter than the top because we're going to keep layering on more details later on, and before adding on anything else, I want to make sure that this is completely dry so it stays intact when I paint around it. I feel like there's still a bit too much space in the background, so I decided to add another layer at the back, and I used a mix of Cobalt Green with a bit of Hansa Yellow in a thin consistency. After adding on this layer, I decided to add a bit of details like some reefs as well as seaweed. I'm just making things up as I go using the same color mixture and still in a light consistency because this is supposed to look faded at the back. I'm not going to add too much since I'm going to add more details in front with this light blue mixture. I like doodling on some corals, which sometimes I like to treat like I'm painting tree branches, and you can also look up for different shapes and inspiration or just different types of reefs in general. Just like the layer at the back, I'm still using a fairly thin consistency. This just looks slightly darker because of the color itself. When I was painting this, I was having so much fun that I decided to add too much detail. This is unnecessary because we're going to paint so much more in front, and sadly this amount of detail will likely just drown in the background. But I was having fun, so I don't mind. However, this is just a heads up for you that there's still going to be time and space to add more of these fun tiny details. Again, at this point, I still didn't realize that I was doing too much, so I just kept on painting more corals. Now let's move on to the next layer. This is the same color mixture with added Ultramarine Finest. I just went ahead and painted another layer, just outlining it first before filling it in. Again, I'm going to smudge this, but I feel like I don't need to paint this right to the bottom because I'm going to just paint the next layer straight away. So I kind of have an idea of how far I want this to go down. But I do want this to be completely dry before adding the next layer, in which case I'll just use the exact same color mixture with a slightly thicker consistency and a little bit of indigo in the mixture. After this, I want to completely dry it off, and since I feel like there's only space for one more layer, I just went ahead and painted. I added more indigo in the mixture for an even darker blue, and I'm going to treat it the same way as the previous layers. Initially, when I painted this, I just wanted to create a flat doodle with many layers. I didn't really think about including fish, but looking at the progression of this painting, it seems like we're looking up from the deep to the light. So this was unplanned, but I wanted to try to paint silhouettes of large fish. I guess these can be sharks, and I also feel like it's the perfect opportunity to paint these silhouettes because of the clear backlight from the background. After painting a couple of sharks, I can start to see the potential, even though I was quite on edge when I was painting this and I was ready to scrap this painting. But I was lucky to just keep going, and I decided to treat the fishes the same way as the layers I've created with the reefs. So the more further away they are, the lighter the color will be, and the more faded these fishes will be. I'm going to include different types of fish, and I'm just going to somewhat make them up along the way. I also had the thought of adding manta rays to this composition, but I wasn't sure how to place it after painting for shark-looking fish. However, I feel like if you add manta rays, it would make this composition look more majestic, so maybe that's something you can add to yours. So here I'm going to start adding the different types of fishes. I'm going to paint them in groups as well, and I'm going to play with the size as well as their shapes. After adding a few, I decided to overlap some of them, and I find that this actually gives more depth to the painting. So don't be scared to do this. However, I would suggest to paint the larger fish at the back further away because they're easier to overlap compared to the smaller ones. And I feel like the smaller ones, if they're painted in a darker value, can add more detail to the composition. Now that I've painted a few different types of fish, I feel like the reef looked empty, so now I'm going to start doodling on some corals. I feel like there's already a lot of detail in the background, so I'm just going to paint these in a similar dark blue as the foreground, and I also like to paint them in a larger scale, especially for the ones in front or closer to our viewpoint. For the reefs closer to us, if I want to paint some overlapping corals, I like to also darken the value. So this is just the same blue, but in a thicker consistency. You can also add more indigo in the ratio. After doodling the corals on top of the reef layers, now I can see that the corners of the foreground closer to our view is looking very empty. So I'm going to add more corals around these areas. But since they're even deeper and closer to our viewpoint here, I'm using a thick consistency of pure indigo. So the color almost looks black. I'm just going to add similar features like what I've painted earlier, and also add some starfish which are just randomly lying there. If however you can think of anything else, feel free to add it in. I couldn't really think of anything else to add, but looking at the painting as a whole again as I was painting this, I feel like the area in light is too open for my liking. So I'm going to close up the composition and create more of a radial or a circular viewpoint, which in my opinion will tighten the focal point of the fish and make the composition easier on the eyes, so our eyes are more focused at the spot instead of moving around and trying to find a resting point for this painting. I'm going to enhance this motion further by adding really tiny school of fish as they're swimming about, creating swirly and curvy patterns following the tighter opening. After adding the smaller school of fish, I feel like everything is coming together a bit better, but I feel like the composition looks too heavy at the bottom, so I'm going to add some white doodles and outlines to break up the heaviness from the dark values and to lighten the composition and bring more detail to these larger coral reefs. I still feel like the overall composition is too open even when I've added the background because it's light, it didn't really do too much. So I'm going to close up this composition even further with these large corals on either side, and I'm going to use indigo, so this will be part of the first layer but it's slightly off frame. I feel like those large corals were good additions, but I wanted to tighten the focal point even further. I'm going to add more large dark corals which will reach the lighter areas of the painting and add even more additional layers to the background. I also want to add dark blue fish, so there will be more variety and value for the fishes as well. Just a few more additions here to finish off, and that's it for this tutorial. Once I'm done, I'm just going to unmask the sides. This was so experimental for me, filled with many uncertainties, but I'm glad I painted this intuitively and I still had so much fun learning. I'm actually quite happy with the overall composition as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider subscribing for more. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!